My story is a bit complicated, but I'll do my best to explain. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to turn 33. I've been married to Mark for 5 years. Initially, we genuinely enjoyed spending time together and had a lot of fun, but as time went on, our relationship began to feel different. We fell into a routine that was comfortable but felt repetitive and dull. They say that sometimes couples can get too comfortable with each other, and I think that might have been the case for us. Still, it was our normal, and I thought we were okay. About a year ago, Mark's job became a lot busier, and he started traveling for work. He had never been away for work before, so this was quite new for both of us. Even though he was providing for us financially, and I had a job too, something was missing. Even when he was home, things weren't the same. Our conversations felt distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself it was just stress from work, but I had my own suspicions. Our marriage looked like it was falling apart from the outside, but I didn't think it was that bad. To me, this was just how things were. Then one day, something strange happened. I came home from work and found Mark already there. He was never home before 11 p.m., but it was only 8 p.m. I was surprised to see him, and he greeted me with a simple hi. It was so out of character, so I asked why he was home so early. Mark explained that his father had been in an accident at work and was in the hospital. A car had hit his father's car after running a red light. The accident left his father paralyzed in both legs and one arm. Luckily, his life wasn't in danger, but he would need a wheelchair from now on. The news was heartbreaking, as Mark's dad loved outdoor activities like hiking and fishing. Now, he would have to depend on a wheelchair and others for help. Soon after, my mother-in-law shocked me by saying she and Mark would be moving out, leaving me to care for my father-in-law permanently. The real surprise came when I realized this meant she was condoning Mark's affair. They were planning to move in with his mistress, who also lived with my mother-in-law. They didn't seem to care about my father-in-law's needs, even though he now required constant care and attention. I was angry and hurt by their actions, but I couldn't imagine leaving my father-in-law to fend for himself. Then something completely unexpected happened. My father-in-law, whom I believed to be confined to a wheelchair, suddenly stood up. I was shocked, as I had assumed he was unable to walk. This turn of events left me speechless and bewildered, wondering what other surprises could possibly come next. In that moment, I felt overwhelmed by the betrayal, the secrets, and the unexpected actions of those around me. My life had taken a turn I never could have anticipated, and I wasn't sure what the future held. My father-in-law, Richard, had always been so kind and treated me like his own daughter. He was the type of person who would help anyone, and seeing him in a wheelchair after his accident broke my heart. He was hit by another car that ran a red light, and the accident left him unable to use both of his legs and one of his arms. Knowing that he would now have to rely on others for even the simplest tasks was heartbreaking, especially for a man who loved being so active. After the accident, Mark's mother, Helen, called him to give him the news. My husband, Mark, worked for a different company than his father's, so he couldn't just leave to be by his side. Mark was frustrated that he couldn't be there to see his father, and I was so sad too. Such a kind man now confined to a wheelchair, all because of an accident that wasn't his fault. But there was no time to wallow in sadness. When Mark looked at me, he said, "Sarah, Mom has a favor to ask about Dad." I was curious and asked, "What does she need?" Mark replied, "She asked if we could take care of him together. She's getting older, and she thinks it'll be too difficult to do everything alone." "Do you mean we need to move to your parents' house?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," he said. "There's plenty of room for us, and it would mean a lot to both of them. What do you think?" I didn't know how to respond. I cared deeply for my father-in-law, but taking on the role of a full-time caregiver was something I had never done before. The thought was overwhelming. Mark sensed my hesitation and took my hand, saying, "I know it's a big change and will be hard at first, but if we leave everything to Mom, she'll struggle too. Please, Sarah. I know we can do this if we work together." "It's going to be so difficult," I said honestly. "I have a job, too. How am I supposed to balance everything?" Mark looked at me, and after a moment of silence, he said, "I want you to quit your job and focus on taking care of Dad with Mom. I'll take care of all the financial stuff." Please, it would mean so much. I was so surprised. Quitting my job felt like a huge sacrifice, but Mark's desperation and my respect for his father made it hard to say no. After thinking it over, I agreed and quit my job to start taking care of my father-in-law with Mark's mother. As time went on, we settled into a routine. Then, one evening at dinner, Mark made a shocking announcement. He stood up and said, "I've decided to take over Dad's company and become president." The news shocked everyone, especially my father-in-law. He never expected Mark, who had always avoided working at his dad's company, to take on such a huge responsibility. With tears in his eyes, my father-in-law looked at Mark and said, "Thank you, Mark. I was worried about the company's future, but now I feel at ease." Mark looked at his father with a determined expression and said, "I want to take care of it for you." In that moment, I saw how much Mark cared about his family and how much his father's health meant to him. Our lives had changed so much, and we were all facing new challenges. But together, we were finding a way to get through it, no matter how difficult things got. "Yes, I will do my best as a son," Mark said to his father, reassuring him. His father, now the honorary president of the company, said, "Just make sure it's a good workplace for everyone." Mark promised he would. Before long, Mark officially took over as president of his father's company, while my father-in-law, though technically retired, retained the role of honorary chairman. He left the daily operations of the company to Mark, but there was still a lot to be done. At first, I was proud of Mark. He was taking on big responsibilities, and I knew this job was a huge step up for him. But within just 3 months, Mark started coming home very late, almost every night. I thought it was because he was still getting used to his role, but 3 months of constant lateness seemed a little odd. Then something else started to bother me. One night, I was up late, unable to sleep. When Mark finally came home, I noticed he smelled strongly of a woman's perfume. It was so out of character. I asked him about it curiously, but instead of explaining, he became defensive. He quickly said that he was just working hard since taking over a business wasn't easy. Then he avoided me, going to bed without another word. I tried to ignore my feelings, but his reaction just made me feel more uneasy. Every time I tried to ask more, he would get irritable and snap at me. One evening, when I was exhausted after a long day, I tried to talk to him calmly. I didn't want to accuse him of anything. I was just curious about what was going on. But Mark seemed to take it the wrong way, accusing me of not appreciating his hard work. "I'm doing this for us, so we can have a better life," he said angrily. I tried to apologize, but he ignored me, going upstairs and making a fuss as he moved around the room, clearly upset. He turned away and started scrolling on his phone, refusing to listen. The next day, I received a surprise visit from my mother-in-law. She was furious and said that Mark had told her about our argument. She accused me of suspecting Mark just because he was working hard for me. I tried to explain that I was just curious, not accusing him of anything, but she didn't want to hear it. She lectured me, saying I shouldn't upset Mark, and left, dumping all the housework on me. It felt so unfair. My mother-in-law always acted like we shared the housework, but in reality, I did everything, including taking care of my father-in-law during the day. She would find excuses to go out and only return in the evenings. My father-in-law, who spent most of his time in his room, didn't realize how often she was gone. She even warned me not to mention anything strange about her absence to him or Mark. Her attitude only added more tension to our home. Despite my frustration, I kept quiet and continued with the housework and caregiving. The days felt long and heavy, and it seemed no one truly appreciated what I was doing. I knew my mother-in-law didn't value me, but I had no choice but to continue, hoping that things might eventually change. The main reason I was able to endure such a difficult life was my father-in-law. Every time I helped him, he would apologize sincerely. He would say, "Sarah, I'm so sorry. You must hate having to take care of an old man like me." I would always respond, "Don't worry about it, Dad. I see you as my own father. I'm happy to help." Hearing that, he would smile and say, "I'm so glad Mark married such a kind person, Sarah. Even though I'm so much trouble with the caregiving, you are always so gentle and kind to me. I'm so lucky." I would reply, "I'm the lucky one to have such a thoughtful father-in-law." His kindness and gratitude made it easier to keep going, even though my husband's and mother-in-law's behavior made me feel uneasy and lonely. My daily routine included getting my father-in-law settled for the night and turning off his lights before bed. One evening, after finishing up with my father-in-law, I returned to the living room and was surprised to find my husband Mark there with his mother. It was unusual for both of them to be there, and something felt off. My suspicions were confirmed when my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Perfect timing, Sarah," she said. "We need to talk. From now on, you'll be responsible for taking care of Richard for the rest of his life." I felt bewildered. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to process everything. But before I could fully grasp what was happening, Mark handed me divorce papers. "I have someone else," he said coldly. "We're moving out to live with her. You can handle the divorce papers on your own." I was stunned and heartbroken. As they packed their bags and ignored my tears, I sat alone in the silent living room, my heart shattering. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I felt completely lost. Suddenly, my father-in-law appeared in his wheelchair. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I heard a commotion and came to see," he said, a worried look on his face. I struggled to find the words, my heart heavy with pain and confusion. After a moment, I shared everything that had happened. His expression turned serious, and I could see the anger in his eyes. To my surprise, he then stood up, his voice suddenly strong and confident. "Let's fight back," he said with finality. I stared in shock, glancing down at his legs. He apologized for keeping the secret and revealed that he could, in fact, walk. Then, from a drawer, he pulled out a large envelope and showed me the contents, evidence of Mark's and even my mother-in-law's infidelity. Stunned, I listened as he explained. Ever since Mark became president, he would leave work on time but come home very late. This made my father-in-law suspicious, so he hired a private detective to investigate. The detective had uncovered Mark's affair, and a deeper investigation showed that my mother-in-law had also been unfaithful, which explained her frequent daytime absences. In fact, she seemed to be fully aware of Mark's affair and even condoned it. There were photos of them meeting up with Mark's mistress. My father-in-law looked at me with determination and said, "It's not right to hide this anymore. You deserve to know the truth, Sarah. Now it's time to confront them." In that moment, I felt a new strength rise within me, knowing I wasn't alone. My father-in-law's courage and his willingness to stand up for me changed everything. Together, we would confront this betrayal, and I finally felt ready to take back control of my life. I looked at my father-in-law, who was so supportive, and said, "I can't live like this anymore. I want to fight back." He nodded, reassuring me. "Leave it to me." He immediately picked up the phone and called someone at his company. Before long, Mark was removed from his position as president. My father-in-law then encouraged me to file for divorce and ask for a fair share of the assets. Following his advice, I quickly contacted a lawyer to get things started. About a week later, Mark showed up at my in-laws' house, furious. He confronted me and my father-in-law, demanding to know why he had lost his presidency just because of his affair. My father-in-law did not mince words. He told Mark it was his own fault for neglecting his duties, causing so much pain to me and bringing shame to the family. He held nothing back, making it clear that Mark was no longer welcome in their home and should never set foot there again. Desperate, Mark turned to me, begging for a second chance. He wanted me to convince his father to forgive him and to stop the divorce. He promised to end his affair and even said he would give up his share of the assets if I would just come back to him. His words sounded so hollow and selfish. Even after everything he had done, he was only thinking about himself and what he had lost. I couldn't believe his audacity. "You want me to call off the divorce?" I asked, stunned. "Are you serious? I'm not going back to someone who betrayed me like you did. I'm done with you." Mark seemed shocked by my reaction, but I continued. "Of course I want a divorce. Why would I stay married to someone who only thinks about himself? This job loss and this divorce, it's all a consequence of your own choices." Mark, clearly panicking, tried to change the narrative, saying the divorce papers were just a scare tactic and that he didn't mean for things to go this far. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm so glad to be rid of you. You, your mother, and your mistress can be together. I'm done being a part of this mess." Frustrated and out of options, Mark tried to argue one last time, but I wasn't listening. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. His selfishness and deceit no longer had power over me. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. With my father-in-law's support, I felt stronger than ever. I was no longer weighed down by Mark's betrayal and deceit. I was ready to move on, to rebuild, and to finally live without the shadow of his lies hanging over me. I kicked Mark out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I could hear him crying and begging for forgiveness, but neither my father-in-law nor I responded. We were done with his lies and his betrayal. After losing his presidency, Mark's life quickly fell apart. His mistress, who only cared about his money and status, kicked him and his mother out of her house as soon as she found out he no longer had any power or wealth. With nowhere else to go, Mark and his mother ended up in a cheap motel, struggling to get by. Losing his job had drained their savings, and they quickly fell into debt. They barely had enough money for food or rent, and before long, they were forced to take any menial labor they could find just to survive. Every day became a struggle as they went from job to job, trying to earn enough to get by. Life was very different for them now, and they were realizing just how much they had lost. Meanwhile, I continued living in my father-in-law's house, taking care of him as I always had. After the divorce, he kindly told me, "You can stay here as long as you like." His words meant so much to me. Grateful for his kindness and support, I decided to make his house my home. He had always treated me with respect and care, and I wanted to be there for him. Recently, my father-in-law started going to a senior center during the day. This gave him a chance to socialize with others and participate in activities he loved, and it allowed me to go back to work. I was so happy to have this balance in my life, as I could both care for him and provide for myself. It felt great to have a little bit of independence back, and knowing he was well taken care of during the day gave me peace. Although I know there may be challenges ahead, I feel ready to face them. My life has changed so much, but I've found a strength I didn't know I had. My father-in-law's kindness showed me that family doesn't have to be connected by blood. It's about the people who truly care for each other. He stood by me when I needed support the most, and I'll continue to be there for him, no matter what. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons this experience taught me. I've learned to appreciate the people who truly care about me, and to stand up for myself when I need to. My future feels bright, and while I don't know exactly what's ahead, I know I'm ready for it. My father-in-law and I have built a life together based on respect and support, and that's something I wouldn't trade for anything. We may have faced hardship, but we've come out stronger, and now I finally feel at peace.
I'm Abigail Hayes, 45, and I built my life my own way. As the president of Hayes Consulting, a tech consulting firm in Austin, I've turned my childhood grit into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Growing up in Oakland, where my mom worked long nursing shifts and my dad fixed cars until his hands were stained black, I learned early on that nothing comes free. Losing my brother, Leo, at 16-inch a car accident shattered me, but it also lit a fire. I worked my way into Stanford on a scholarship, coded through sleepless nights, and founded my company with 2 friends in a cramped apartment. Now, we're the go-to firm for tech giants, but I still stay true to my roots, hiking the hill country, listening to indie rock, and steering clear of anything fake, especially in love. That's why the wine in my face hurt so much. I stood in the opulent dining room of the Vance family in Charlotte, my navy blazer dripping with wine as Eleanor Vance sneered. "There, I've washed that country stench off you." Her words cut deeper than the Merlot stinging my eyes. I was here to announce my engagement to her son, Ethan, 42, thinking I'd found someone real. But Ethan's laugh, sharp and mocking, echoed through the room, tearing apart every hope I had. The carefully chosen outfit, the hair pulled back into a bun, all meant to honor the moment, now felt like a costume for a fool. I dabbed at my face, my heart pounding, and met Eleanor's smug gaze. Ethan stood beside her, still chuckling, oblivious to the storm in my chest. George Vance, Ethan's father and the CEO of Vance Industries, our key supplier, looked horrified but stayed silent. I had hidden my role as president of Hayes Consulting from Ethan and Eleanor to see their true self. Now I saw them clearly. "I am terminating our contract with Vance Industries," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. Eleanor's sneer vanished. Ethan's jaw dropped. George's eyes widened, knowing my company's contracts were what kept his business afloat. "You can't," Eleanor started, but I cut her off. "I am Abigail Hayes, president of Hayes Consulting. We are your biggest client." Or were. The room froze, and I felt a wave of clarity. This wasn't just about wine or words. This was about respect, trust, and the life I had built. I turned and walked away, leaving their stunned whispers behind, my heels clicking on their polished floor. I never planned to get married. My life in Austin was fulfilling enough, leading Hayes Consulting, hiking on weekends, and unwinding with a good playlist or a book. My parents, still in Oakland, taught me to value hard work over fairy tales. My mom's endless shifts at the hospital and my dad's oil-stained hands showed me what it took to survive. Leo's death at 16 cemented that. Life was too short for anything less than real. I poured my grief into code, built my company from nothing, and found peace in my independence. Love? It always felt like a distraction. So when George Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, called last spring, I was skeptical. "Abigail, I want you to meet someone," he said, his voice warm but insistent. George and I had worked together for a decade. My company's tech solutions had propped up his struggling firm. I trusted his judgment, but a setup? I hesitated. "He's very special," George pressed. Curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet his son, Ethan, 42, at a coffee shop. Ethan was charming, with dimples and an easy conversation about Charlotte's craft beer culture. He was polite, attentive, and seemed genuine, though I caught a flicker of something else, perhaps immaturity, in his quick glances at his phone. He was the youngest of 3, a 2-time almost groom, and still single. I liked his honesty about it, and when he asked to see me again, I said yes. For the first time, I wondered if love could fit into my life. A month later, Ethan proposed. It was sudden, over dinner at a cozy restaurant, his eyes anxious but hopeful. "I think we could be really great together, Abigail," he said. My heart raced, not from romance, but from the leap I was considering. I had kept my president title from him, wanting to be seen as Abigail, not a title. Perhaps that was my mistake. I said yes, thinking we could grow together, but a quiet unease remained, like a shadow I couldn't name. Ethan's charm carried us through the first few dates, but cracks began to show. On our third date at a trendy Austin brew pub, he wore a simple denim jacket, looking younger than his 42 years. I'd traded my usual blazer for jeans, hoping to match his vibe. We laughed like teenagers, but his comments started to sting. "You must love this place," he said, a little smirk on his face over his craft beer. "I bet it's fancier than what you're used to." I forced a smile. He didn't know I'd been here last week with a client, closing a deal over the same truffle fries he was raving about. I let it slide, not wanting to embarrass him. But the pattern grew. At a riverside cafe, he noticed my leather briefcase, a custom-made piece from a local artisan, sleek and functional. "You should get a designer purse, something with a logo," he said, his tone half joking, half patronizing. I bit my tongue. The bag cost more than his watch, a mid-range piece he'd proudly shown off, assuming I'd be impressed. "It's nice," I said, deflecting. But his assumption that I couldn't afford better gnawed at me. I began to notice his reliance on his mother, Eleanor. "Mom says you have a good heart, but you need to upgrade your style," he'd say, laughing. Calling her mommy at 42 felt odd, as if he were still tethered to her approval. I brushed it off, reminding myself of his good points, like when he'd surprise me with my favorite coffee. But the unease grew. Was I ignoring red flags out of hope? I'd built Hayes Consulting by trusting my gut. But here, I was second-guessing it. Still, I told myself 3 dates weren't enough to judge. I'd give it time, hoping Ethan's heart would outweigh his flaws. By our 5th date, I was wrestling with my doubts about Ethan. We met at a crowded hotel buffet in Charlotte, the kind of place I'd go for a client meeting, not for romance. Ethan piled his plate high. Steak, shrimp, pasta, more than anyone could eat. "Are you sure you'll finish all that?" I teased gently, thinking of the waste. He laughed too loudly. "Abigail, don't be so cheap. It's okay to throw away what I don't eat." My stomach clenched. It wasn't about the money. It was the disregard, the assumption that I was petty for caring. His words echoed Eleanor's influence. "Mommy says you're probably after my family's money," he blurted out, poking at his pasta. "I didn't mean to upset you." The word mommy, again, like a child's plea, sent a shiver down my spine. I had spent years building Hayes Consulting, out-earning companies like his father's, yet he saw me as a gold digger. I swallowed my anger, not wanting to ruin the evening. "Let's just enjoy dinner," I said, my voice tight. Driving me home, Ethan took my hand as I got out. "Abigail, marry me. Not now, but soon. I'll wait." His eyes were sincere, and despite everything, my heart softened. I had seen his good sides, his attentiveness, his apologies. Maybe he could grow. "Let's work on this together," I said, my eyes welling up. "We both have flaws, but we can talk through them." He nodded, relieved. and I felt a flicker of hope. I wanted to believe in us, in the idea that love could smooth out rough edges, but deep down, I wondered if I was trying to fix something that was already broken. Ethan's proposal still hung in my mind, but his next words shattered the moment. "You'll need to quit your job, Abigail," he said, grinning as if it were obvious. "Mommy says a wife's place is at home, learning from her." My blood ran cold. I had built Hayes Consulting from scratch, my pride and joy, and he thought I'd toss it aside? "If that's your attitude, Ethan, there's no wedding," I snapped, slamming his car door. I stormed into my Austin apartment, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. That weekend, Ethan texted relentlessly, begging to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He was waiting at our usual coffee shop, looking like a scolded child. "I'm so sorry, Abigail," he said, his voice low. "My friends told me I should set rules early. They were wrong, and I was an idiot." His sincerity chipped away at my resolve. I remembered my parents' advice. "Love takes work." "Don't ever pull that again," I said, half smiling. "We're engaged, so let's act like partners." He beamed, promising to do better. A month later, we planned to meet his family to announce our engagement. I was nervous but hopeful. George had always been kind, and I assumed Eleanor, his wife, would be too. Ethan seemed off that morning, fidgety as we drove to their Charlotte mansion. "About Mom," he started, then trailed off. I braced myself, expecting typical mother-in-law quirk. I'd heard Eleanor was difficult, but I believed honesty would win her over. Clutching my custom briefcase, I walked into their home, ready to build a future. I had no idea how wrong I was. The Vance dining room gleamed with wealth, a crystal chandelier, a mahogany table, but the air felt heavy. I smiled at Eleanor, extending a hand to shake, but she sneered, holding a glass of Merlot. Before I could speak, she flung the wine in my face. The cold liquid stung my eyes. "There, I've washed that country stench off you," she sneered. Ethan burst out laughing, clutching his stomach. My heart sank, the betrayal cutting deeper than the wine dripping from my chin. George gasped. "Eleanor, what the hell?" but stayed frozen. I dabbed at my face, trembling but resolute. My months of hiding my role as president of Hayes Consulting were meant to see Ethan's true self. Now I saw it, cruel and cowardly. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "The engagement is off, and so is our contract with Vance Industries." Eleanor's sneer faltered. Ethan's laughter died. George's face went white, knowing my company's contracts were his lifeline. "You can't do that," Eleanor snapped. I stepped forward, looking her in the eye. "I am Abigail Hayes, president of Hayes Consulting. We were your biggest client, responsible for 40% of your revenue. Or we were." Ethan's jaw dropped. He worked in his dad's company and knew my firm's name. Eleanor's hand trembled, her wine glass clattering against the table. George stammered, "Abigail, please, let's talk." But I was done. The pain in my chest fueled my resolve. I had built my life on being real, and I wouldn't let their mockery define me. I turned, wine-soaked but unbroken, and walked out, leaving their stunned silence behind. Back in my Austin office, I faced George's frantic emails, but my decision was final. Hayes Consulting had propped up Vance Industries for years, and I laid it all out. "Your firm's outdated methods are sinking it," I told George on a tense call. "High employee turnover, inefficient production. My board has already been eyeing new partners." My voice was calm, but my heart ached. I had trusted Ethan, hoped for a partner, only to find a man-child echoing his mother's cruelty. Eleanor's outburst wasn't just personal. It was a symptom of their family's dysfunction. George admitted their company was losing money, hoping my engagement to Ethan would secure our partnership. "I misjudged things," he said, his voice shaking. Ethan, silent on the call, didn't know my role, but he'd seen our company logo on his father's contracts. His ignorance was no excuse for his laughter. Meanwhile, Eleanor was screaming in the background, calling me a manipulator. I hung up, her voice echoing in my mind. I thought of my parents in Oakland, who would applaud my strength but grieve for my pain. Losing Leo had taught me to guard my heart, but I had let Ethan in, only to be humiliated. The business collapse wasn't revenge, it was survival. Hayes Consulting couldn't be linked to a sinking ship, and I couldn't have a life with someone who saw me as beneath them. As I looked out at the Austin skyline, my resolve hardened. I built this life from pain and grit, and no one, not Eleanor, not Ethan, could take that from me. 5 months after I walked away, Vance Industries collapsed under its own weight. George stepped down, taking responsibility for years of poor management. A new CEO, a sharp former VP, had a total revamp of operations, cutting family ties and releasing innovative products. The industry praised the turnaround, and I had considered resuming the contract, but the trust was broken. My heart, though, had mended. Eleanor's and Ethan's world imploded. George divorced Eleanor, dividing assets but leaving her to fend for herself. She and Ethan moved into a cramped Charlotte apartment, their luxurious lifestyle gone. Ethan, unemployed and aimless at 42, leaned on Eleanor, who grew increasingly bitter under the pressure. Rumors flew of their constant fighting, and eventually Eleanor abandoned him, retreating to a cheap rental, alone and friendless. Her once socialite pretense had pushed everyone away. Ethan fell back on George, who was trying to teach him basic life skills, cooking, budgeting, things he had never learned under Eleanor's wing. I heard Ethan was struggling, frequently breaking down without his mother's safety net. A part of me pitied him, but the memory of his laughter as wine dripped down my face kept my sympathy in check. Their downfall wasn't my doing. It was the consequence of their own hubris. In Austin, I focused on Hayes Consulting. Our growth steady, my team loyal. The sting of the betrayal lingered, but I felt lighter, as if I had shed a weight I didn't know I was carrying. 3 years later, I'm thriving. Hayes Consulting is stronger than ever. Our stock soaring as we land major clients. I've traded late-night coding sessions for early morning rock climbing. I volunteer at a community center in Oakland, teaching kids from families like mine how to code. Their eager faces reminding me of my own hunger to rise. My parents, proud but never pushing, support my single status. "You are enough," my mom says, and I believe her. I once thought love could complete me, but Ethan's betrayal showed me the opposite. His laughter, Eleanor's wine toss, they exposed a truth I had been ignoring. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. My Austin apartment, with its view of Lady Bird Lake and its worn bookshelves, feels like home. I put on indie rock, cook for one, and find joy in the small things. A sunrise hike, a perfect line of code, the smile on a child's face when their program runs. I sometimes wonder about love, but not right now. Maybe at 60, when I've lived more of my story, I'll risk my heart again. For now, my happiness is my own creation. I think of Leo, how his death shaped me, and I feel him in every step I take. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. Hard, won, real, and full of potential. Looking back at that wine-soaked night, I see it as a turning point. I walked into the Vance home hoping for a family, but I left with something better. Clarity. Ethan and Eleanor's cruelty dissolved my doubts, revealing the strength I had built over years. Losing Leo at 16 taught me to fight for my place in the world, and I did, building Hayes Consulting from a dream into a force. That night, I reclaimed my voice, my worth, and my future. I don't hate Ethan or Eleanor. Their lives fell apart because they valued status over substance, a lesson I will never forget. George, now retired, sent me a letter last year, apologizing once more. He's raising Ethan as the son he never truly knew, and I hope they find peace. As for me, I'm not looking back. My days are filled with purpose, leading my team, climbing mountains, mentoring kids. Love might find me one day, but it won't define me. I've learned that happiness is a choice, one I make every day, rooted in the life I've built and the person I've become. To all of you who have followed my story, thank you. You've been with me through betrayal, strength, and rebirth. If my journey touched you, hit subscribe and join us, where every challenge shapes a story of resilience, heart, and new beginnings. Keep forging your own path, and I'll see you at the top.
My name is Alara Vance, and at 37, I live my life in spreadsheets and skylines. My world is the thrumming heart of Charlotte, North Carolina, a city built on ambition and banking, now sprawling ever outward with the very suburbs and skyscrapers my company erects. The condo I share with my husband, Nolan, is a testament to that success. A sleek, glass-walled space on the 45th floor, owned by his family's company Vanguard Developments. From here, you can see the whole city, a glittering kingdom of steel and light. Vanguard pulls in billions a year, a titan of construction in the Southeast, founded by my formidable father-in-law Arthur Pierce. I never planned on this life. I never imagined myself in a hard hat, arguing logistics with a site foreman, or in a boardroom, dissecting multi-million-dollar contracts. My roots are buried in the cold, hard soil of the Rust Belt, in a cramped two-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of bleach and my mother's exhaustion. She was a ghost in my childhood, a blur of motion working 2 jobs, a nurse's aide by day, a cleaner of sterile office buildings by night. She was a single mother who taught me that the world doesn't give you anything for free. She taught me to be sharp, to see the angles, and to never, ever let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. That grit was my inheritance. It powered me through a state university on a full scholarship and landed me a coveted job in investment banking. I loved the cold, hard logic of it. The numbers were a language, and I was fluent. They told stories of risk and reward, of folly and genius. If you just knew how to listen. I was good at it. And I was on a fast track. I thought that would be my story. Then I met Nolan Pierce. He was different from the aggressive, fast-talking finance guys I was used to. He had a gentle, unassuming charm, a quiet confidence that came from a life without struggle. He'd grown up in a world of privilege I could barely imagine, with a trust fund and a last name that opened every door. He was kind and handsome, and when he looked at me, I felt seen for something other than my ambition. I thought maybe my story could change. Maybe it could soften. I pictured a different life. One as a homemaker, building a family, trading boardrooms for playdates. For a while, that dream felt real, tangible. But dreams built on faulty foundations are the first to crumble. Nolan is my opposite in every fundamental way. Where I am driven, he drifts. Where I see a challenge, he sees an obstacle to his comfort. His father, Arthur Pierce, is a legend. He built Vanguard Developments from a small, local outfit into a juggernaut, a brilliant, ruthless businessman who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He'd spent decades grooming Nolan to take over, to be the heir to the throne. The problem was, Nolan never wanted the crown. I remember one Tuesday evening, maybe a year into our marriage. I was on my laptop, deconstructing a complex merger proposal for the bank, my mind buzzing with figures. Nolan was sprawled on our designer sectional, a masterpiece of Italian leather, mindlessly flipping through channels, landing on some vapid reality show about impossibly wealthy people complaining about their impossibly perfect lives. He let out a soft sigh. "I could never do what my dad does," he said to the television. "All that stress, all those decisions." He finally turned to me, his expression not regretful but relieved. "I'm just not cut out to be a CEO, Ela. I'd just be a figurehead, signing what they tell me to sign. It's easier that way." I stared at him, the tapping of my keys falling silent. A cold knot formed in my stomach. How could someone be so content to be a passenger in their own life? I am wired to drive. Decisions come to me like breathing. I assess, I calculate, I trust my gut, and I execute. My mother used to joke I was born with a calculator in one hand and a 5-year plan in the other. When I married Nolan, my plan had been to leave my high-stress banking career to focus on us. But my father-in-law had other ideas. A few months after our wedding, Arthur called me into his office. It was a cavernous room, paneled in dark mahogany, smelling of leather and old money. The walls were covered in blueprints of landmark buildings and framed awards. He was an intimidating presence, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Ilera," he began, his voice a low rumble. "I've reviewed your portfolio. Your work at the bank is impressive. You have a head for numbers and a spine of solid steel. This company needs that. Nolan is my son, but he doesn't have the fire. You do. Come work for us." I hesitated. I remembered my dream of a quieter life, a family, of stepping off the corporate ladder. But the challenge in his eyes, the undisguised respect from a man like Arthur Pierce, was a siren song I couldn't resist. I said yes. And that single word detonated my life. At first, it was a slow burn. I was just another executive, learning the labyrinthine world of construction timelines, material sourcing, labor negotiations, zoning laws. But Arthur saw something in me. He became my mentor. He started inviting me to board meetings, initially just to observe. The board was a classic old boys club, a collection of silver-haired men in expensive suits who had been with Arthur for decades. The first time I walked in, you could feel their skepticism. The founder's pretty young daughter-in-law, a banker no less. I was an outsider, a novelty. Then Arthur started asking for my input. "Ela, what's your take on the projected ROI for the Riverwalk project?" he'd ask, putting me on the spot. I didn't shrink. I had done my homework. I had spent nights poring over every financial statement, every supplier contract, every budget projection until the numbers danced in my head. So I spoke up. "The ROI is solid, I'd say, my voice steady, but our materials cost is inflated by 12%. Our primary steel supplier is marking us up compared to market averages. We can renegotiate or diversify our suppliers. I've already identified 2 alternatives that could save us close to $8 million in the next fiscal year alone." Silence. Then, slow nods. Frowns of skepticism turned into looks of consideration. Slowly, grudgingly, I earned their respect. They started seeking me out, deferring to my judgment on financial calls. I was good at this. I thrived on it. Nolan, however, was a ghost. He held the title of Executive Vice President, a seat on the board gifted to him by his father, but he was rarely there. He'd skip crucial meetings, claiming they were too technical or that he had a client lunch, which was usually code for a round of golf at the country club. The board never said a word. His father's legacy gave him a lifetime hall pass. The chasm between us grew wider with every deal I closed. One night, I came home after a marathon 14-hour day spent hammering out a contentious new labor agreement. My head was buzzing with adrenaline and exhaustion. I found Nolan on the couch, in the exact same spot, controller in hand, playing a video game. "Why weren't you at the quarterly review today?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I dropped my briefcase on the floor with a heavy thud. "You're a board member, Nolan. You're supposed to be a part of this." He didn't even pause his game. "You've got it covered, Ella," he said, his eyes glued to the screen. "They listen to you, not me. It's better this way." His casual indifference was like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about us. He was checking out not just from his legacy, but from our marriage. I threw myself deeper into my work. It was my refuge, the one place where I felt competent and in control, the one place where my efforts yielded clear, tangible results. With every step I climbed at Vanguard, Nolan seemed to drift further away, and a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety started to vibrate under my skin. Something was about to break. By the time Arthur Pierce announced his retirement, I was the de facto chief operating officer. He remained chairman of the board, but I was running the day-to-day operations. The board didn't just lean on me, they relied on me. I felt a fire in my chest. This was what I was meant to do. Growing up, I'd watched my mom scrape by to keep a roof over our heads. Now, I was leading a company that employed thousands of people, families who counted on Vanguard to keep their own roofs over their heads. That responsibility was a heavy, sacred weight. Nolan, meanwhile, was an apparition in his own life. He'd show up at the office a few mornings a week in a perfectly pressed shirt, exchange pleasantries, and be gone by noon. I'd come home to find him napping or watching sports. "Nolan, this is your legacy," I'd plead, my voice taut with a frustration that had become my constant companion. "Your father built this from nothing. Don't you want to be a part of it?" He'd give me that same infuriating, lazy shrug. "You're doing great without me, Ella." It stung. It felt like he was opting out of us. Our conversations became a barren landscape of small talk. The weather, groceries, traffic. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of our multi-million-dollar condo, feeling utterly, completely alone. Then my stepsister, Sloane, blew back into town like a hurricane. Sloane is 3 years older, a whirlwind of charisma, designer clothes, and razor-sharp edges. We weren't raised together, but we shared a roof for a few turbulent years after my mom married her dad, a gruff long-haul trucker who didn't stick around long. Sloane learned early on how to use her charm and looks as currency. She was always chasing something bigger, shinier. Her latest prize had been a hotshot lawyer from a wealthy Dallas family. Their marriage ended in a spectacular dumpster fire when she cheated on him. The scandal was messy, and her ex, a man with a flair for the dramatic, stormed into our parents' house, threatening lawsuits and screaming about betrayal. I was swamped with a potential acquisition deal, so Nolan went to handle it. It was one of the few things he was genuinely good at: diffusing tension with his calm, steady presence. Sloan was endlessly effusive afterward, calling me to gush. "Your husband is just amazing, Ella." He handled Chad like a pro, so calm, so in control. I brushed it off, too buried in spreadsheets to give it a second thought. But that incident changed how Sloan saw Nolan. To her, he wasn't just my laid-back, unambitious husband anymore. He was Nolan Pierce, the sole heir to the Vanguard Development's fortune, a golden ticket. She had no idea his title was ceremonial, a courtesy from his father. Sloan has always been drawn to the magnetic pull of wealth. Her ex-husband's high six-figure salary hadn't been enough to keep her loyal, but it was why she'd married him in the first place. Now, freshly divorced and drowning in alimony payments she had to make, she was on the hunt. I was too blind to see it, too consumed by work. I didn't notice the way she started lingering around Nolan, her laughter a little too loud at his jokes, the constant stream of texts about catching up. One Thursday evening, I came home, my mind still spinning from a day of intense negotiations. Nolan was waiting in the living room. The television was off. His usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a heavy, unreadable expression. "Ela, we need to talk," he said. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. Nolan never sounded serious. I sat down on the edge of the armchair opposite him, bracing myself. "Sloan is pregnant," he said, his gaze fixed on the expensive Persian rug. "It's mine. I want a divorce." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, hanging in the air-conditioned silence of the room. Pregnant? Divorce? My mind reeled, a chaotic slideshow of images. Sloan laughing at our wedding, Nolan shrugging on the couch, my stepsister, my husband. I wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter something. But years of boardroom discipline took over. I pushed the emotion down, locking it away in a cold, dark box. All I could manage to ask was, "When is she coming here to discuss this?" He mumbled something about my next day off, a Saturday. I nodded, numb. The fog of shock was already beginning to clear, replaced by the ice-cold clarity of strategic thinking. I had to protect my position. I had to protect everything I had built. The next morning, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel of my car, I drove out to the sprawling Pierce estate in one of Charlotte's most exclusive suburbs. Arthur was in his study. I laid it all out for him: Nolan's affair, Sloan's pregnancy, the impending divorce. His wife, Eleanor, who had been hovering nearby, gasped, her eyes lighting up with the giddy, inappropriate delight of a long-awaited grandchild. One sharp, withering look from Arthur silenced her. He leaned back in his leather chair, his face a granite mask. He was silent for a long, heavy minute. Then, a slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Alara," he said, his voice firm, "you are the heart and soul of this company. I don't give a damn what my son does in his personal life. You keep running things. You have my full support. I will handle Nolan." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It was a cold comfort. He was choosing his legacy over his own son. But for me, it was a lifeline. When Saturday came, Sloan arrived at the condo looking like the cat who had swallowed the canary. She sauntered in, her designer handbag swinging like a trophy. "Ela," she began, her voice dripping with the vilest, most condescending pity. "I am just so sorry you and Nolan couldn't have kids. But don't you worry. I'll make sure you get a very generous settlement. Enough to start over somewhere new. Just leave this place. Leave Charlotte. It'll be easier for everyone." She gestured around the condo as if she already owned it. Nolan sat on the couch, silent and blank, a spectator at the demolition of his own life. I almost laughed, the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it. She thought she was stealing a billionaire's lifestyle. I kept my composure, channeling the same icy focus I used to dismantle hostile takeover bids. "A divorce is fine," I said, my voice perfectly level, "but we'll need lawyers to sort out alimony and the division of assets. And Sloan," I added, looking her directly in the eye, "are you quite sure Nolan is the prize you think he is?" Her eyes narrowed, but she just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I know what I have, Ela. Nolan's got everything I'll ever need." I held back a smirk. She had no idea. She thought he was the president, the heir, sitting on a personal fortune. She didn't know the condo was company property. She didn't know his executive salary, a vanity stipend from his father, barely covered his country club dues. I had been paying for our life, our bills, our vacations for years. The official divorce negotiation was set for the following week. I hired the sharpest corporate lawyer in the city, a woman named Miss Chen, who was known for being a shark in a Chanel suit. We met in a sleek conference room at the Vanguard headquarters, the city skyline, a glittering backdrop. Sloane strutted in, all bravado, with Nolan trailing behind her like a lost puppy. "All right, Rachel," Sloane began before anyone else could speak, tossing her hair back. "Let's not drag this out. Name your price for alimony. I'll make sure Nolan takes care of you." Miss Chen simply raised an elegant eyebrow. She slid a document across the polished mahogany table. "Since your client is so generously offering," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "we will be filing a claim for alimony from Mr. Pierce. And given the circumstances of the dissolution of this marriage, we will also be pursuing a claim against you, Miss Masters, for alienation of affection." Sloane's jaw dropped. "Me? You can't do that. I'm already paying alimony to my ex," she sputtered. I leaned back, watching the first cracks appear in her smug facade. My mother's voice echoed in my head. People who chase shortcuts always end up tripping over their own feet. Next came the property. "This condo is Pierce family property," Sloane declared, trying to regain control. "It's not part of the marital assets." "You are correct," Miss Chen replied without missing a beat. "The condo and the land it sits on is an asset of Vanguard Developments. The company decides who resides there." Nolan blinked. "Wait, I thought Dad owned it personally," he mumbled. Sloane's face went pale. "So, we can't live there?" "You certainly can, miss," Chen said crisply, "if the company's acting CEO approves your lease application." She paused, then glanced pointedly at me. I watched the dawning horror spread across Sloane's face as the truth finally hit her like a physical blow. "Hold on," Sloane said, whipping her head around to face Nolan. "You're not the CEO." I decided it was time for me to speak. "I am Sloane," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm the acting CEO. Arthur made me president when he retired. Nolan is a senior advisor. He holds no executive power. The board trusts me to run this company." Nolan wouldn't meet my eyes. Sloane's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're joking," she hissed at him. "You let me believe you were the boss." He just shrugged. That same infuriating, passive shrug that had defined our entire marriage. Miss Chen, clearly enjoying herself, slid another document across the table. "Here is the standard employee lease agreement for the penthouse unit. As you can see, it is leased at the current market rate." The number on the page was astronomical. Nolan's eyes went wide. "My salary can't cover a quarter of that," he whispered, mostly to himself. Sloane looked like she'd been slapped. She had walked in here believing she had won the lottery. Now she was staring at a future of crushing debt and a powerless, broke partner. My salary had been quietly covering our expenses for years. We had no joint savings to split. The divorce would be clean, but for them, it would be brutal. I walked out of that room feeling 100 pounds lighter. The fallout was swift and spectacular. A few weeks later, word got back to the Pierce family that Sloane's pregnancy claim had been a complete fabrication. She had faked the entire thing to trap Nolan, hoping his family's wealth would solve her financial problems. Eleanor was devastated. Arthur was livid. The atmosphere at the Pierce estate became suffocatingly toxic. Dinners were held in dead silence, broken only by the heavy clink of silverware against porcelain. Eleanor, Nolan's mother, often wept silently, while Arthur remained as frigid as a block of ice, his gaze never lingering on Sloane for more than a second. Desperation finally pushed Sloane to her limit. One afternoon, she found Arthur in his study, trying to muster the most pathetic tears she could. "Father," she sobbed, her voice trembling, "I know I made a terrible mistake, but Chad, my ex-husband, he's threatening to sue me if I don't pay the alimony. I don't have a penny to my name. Please, for the honor of the Pierce family name, please help me." Arthur didn't even look up from the ledger he was reviewing. He let the silence stretch on, making Sloane squirm. Finally, he slowly raised his head, his eyes as sharp as daggers. "Honor?" he repeated, his voice low and cold. "You used to lie about a grandchild that never existed to try and claw your way into this family. You have ruined my son. Do you think you have the right to speak of honor in this house?" But Nolan loves me," Sloane stammered. A final, feeble attempt. Arthur laughed, a dry and merciless sound. Nolan doesn't know what love is. He only knows how to take the easiest path. And you were that path. He stood, walked around his desk, and stopped directly in front of the trembling Sloane. He spoke definitively, each word a hammer blow bolting the final door shut. You are nothing to this family. Sloane couldn't handle it. The next morning, she packed a few things, left a hastily scrawled note for Nolan filled with bitter accusations, and then vanished without another word. She had arrived with nothing, and she left with nothing, leaving Nolan alone to face the wreckage. A few weeks later, Nolan came to me. He showed up at the door of my new apartment in Midtown, a much more modest place than the penthouse, but it was peaceful, and it was entirely mine. He looked gaunt, his expensive suit now hanging loosely on his frame, his usual confidence replaced by a pathetic desperation. "Ella," he pleaded, his eyes watering, "please, can we try again? I made a mistake. My dad cut off my credit cards and demoted me. I don't know what to do." I laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but one born of sheer, exhausted disbelief. He wasn't even apologizing for betraying me. He was just lamenting his own circumstances. "A mistake, Nolan?" I said calmly. "That wasn't a mistake, it was a series of choices. You chose to cheat on me with my own stepsister. But the truth is, you chose to check out of our marriage long before Sloane ever showed up. You chose ease over responsibility, passivity over effort." I took a step back, my hand on the doorknob. "You never really lost anything, Nolan, because you never built anything yourself. Everything you had was given to you, and now that it's been taken away, you realize how empty you truly are." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice devoid of any remaining emotion. "I'm done." I closed the door, the sound echoing like a final, definitive period. Just as Arthur had promised, he had handled Nolan. The title of executive vice president was stripped away. Nolan was now an entry-level compliance analyst, working in a windowless office in the basement. The one-time heir to Vanguard Developments was now just another anonymous cog in the massive machine I was running. And sometimes, when I send a company-wide memo, I scroll through the recipient list and see his name near the bottom. And I find myself smiling. The heir to Vanguard Developments was now just another cog in the machine I was running. And I was running it well. Running this company wasn't just a job, it was my calling. Every new project, every signed contract felt like a promise kept to my mom, to the little girl in the cramped apartment who dreamed of a different life. Our profits soared. My father-in-law became my closest confidant, our relationship forged in the fire of his son's failure. "You're doing what I always hoped Nolan would," he told me once, his eyes filled with a pride that meant more to me than any stock option. "I don't think about remarriage. My heart has been through a meat grinder. For now, I'm married to my work, to the thousands of employees who depend on this company. Their trust is the foundation I build on. I learned what it means to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. Sloane and Nolan are just a distant memory, a painful but necessary lesson.